So, feeling overwhelmed and numb at work isn't the same as feeling burned out, but it could be worse simply because of the volume of people that are feeling this way right now. So, what can HR do about Generation Numb? Well, a discussion about that is coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my awesome guests. So today my guest is Josh Cardoz. Josh is the Chief Creative and Learning Officer at Sponge, which is a learning agency helping companies create better learning experiences. He spent over 2 decades figuring out how to make workplace learning actually stick. And he's particularly interested in humans in a particularly disruptive era in the workforce. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Andrea, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. So recently, Sponge wrote some kind of white paper. So tell me about that. What is going on with people at work?
What is going on with people at work?
What is going on with people at work?
That would be the way that I would probably reframe it if we didn't find a catchier title. But all we've been really trying to do, to be honest with you, is just really capture the signals, capture a feeling. And when someone asks me about what do you mean by generation numb? What does it actually look like? I always the first word that comes to mind for me is feeling. And we've all been feeling something going on at work. I don't need to wax poetic about what's going on in the world. We all know what's going on. Global uncertainty. We're in a poly crisis. We know the price of bread. We know the effects on the economy and the shifts that organizations need to make now at just a ridiculous pace in terms of transformation and change. And what we felt as doing as being a people enablement agency, having been around for, over 2 decades at this point, is we felt it was good to get a pulse on the workforce right now. And we know there's a lot of state of the workforce reports out there. I've read them all.
Yeah.
and a lot of them have been cited in this paper here. But we wanted to really connect the signals that we've been seeing. Signals, to your point, about burnout, disengagement, the evolution of quiet quitting, what it means to still recover from the pandemic, but sort of have an eye towards AI, and what any of that's really going to mean for us in the next months to years. And what we're finding is that all of it is just numbness. There's a numbness going on in the workforce right now. And it's not that people still aren't showing up to work. They're just not showing up to work being their best selves. They're not showing up to being their work, offering that last lever of performance that is actually the difference of whether you're going to remain strategically competitive as an organization or survive your next transformation. And so Mobilising Generation Numb, that's the title of the white paper that I highly encourage your audience to read. Trust me, it's a good one. It's worth reading. Really spells out what we see as the malady of what's going on in the workforce, all the signals that are going on, but a remedy. And, there is hope. It's not just doom and gloom, and actually a way specifically for leaders, whether you're an HR leader or speaking or in collaboration with other leaders in your function, for what are we supposed to do about this, and how can we actually turn it into a strategic opportunity?
Mm-hmm. You talked about the signals, which I'm going to relabel as data, right? As that data insights. What is the data saying?
Well, the overwhelming one, which is why we chose this particular word, is numbness. And if I were to break it down even further, I would kind of break down the signals into cynical, exhausted, overwhelmed, detached. And probably the one that stands out to me the most is seeking community. And, you and I had a little bit of a chat beforehand about, well, isn't this just kind of a form of engagement or disengagement? And my answer to that is like, not exactly, because when you think of something like, what does it mean to seek community at work anymore? And how 20% of the workforce is experiencing daily loneliness. That's a very different era of what's going on in the workforce right now. And so some of the data that we were talking about was, and the way we kind of broke it down is that people are on one side consistently overwhelmed. So overwhelmed by the amount of change and transformation going on in the workforce. And so change fatigue is a very real thing. Probably one of my favorite stats in the research for this was that McKinsey laid out that in the first 30 days of the pandemic, we saw 5 years worth 5 years worth of digital transformation happened in 30 days. Now, we were in survival mode in that moment, and in many ways, it was just a moment of just extreme innovation. But I think the hangover from that is that organizations have now set a precedent for their people that that's just what change is going to look like. Couple
Mm.
that with things like digital overwhelm, which is, I think, a real challenge for all of us in our lives right now. We are constantly stimulated and overwhelmed in the digital world, yet it all actually feels so underwhelming. And I'll never shy away from using this word when I've been given the venue to do it, but it is sort of my favorite word in the moment, and that is enshittification. Which, if you're not familiar with the concept of it, it is basically what happened to the internet. And it's not just even the internet, but even just it's the taking of the things that we once found a lot of joy or pleasure in and seeing the erosion of those things disappear. So whether it's your social media feed kind of sucking these days, it's not by accident, or whether it's happening in the real world. And my favorite example of enshittification in the real world is actually people who are summiting Mount Everest, which is, the pinnacle of human achievement, and
Yes.
how there's a lineup at the top of Mount Everest to get your 5 minutes of selfies because it's just turned into an industry of climbing it. And so this component of the loss of wonder in our lives and how we show up to work and what that means, whether it shows up as loneliness or whether it shows up as cynicism. Another data point I can give you is that 45% of orgs report that their people have a low trust culture. How am I supposed to get you excited about our customers or about the path we're going the next 5 years when close to half your people are like, I don't really believe you or any of this or think that you actually care about my well-being? And so all these signals for us is really just the meta-analysis, the coming together of numbness all across.
Yeah. It's a lot, but it's also hitting it on the nose. We could see this whole loneliness thing coming, and we've been able to see it coming for forever. And then when you talk about trust, as I reflect on that with it, the level of trust we have in our government institutions right now is at an all-time low. Like, there's just so much trust missing generally, and not just at work. But you picked Generation Numb for the title of your paper. Is it a generation or is it everybody?
We quite intentionally went with sort of a provocative term like Generation Numb,
Okay.
and we decided to do that because we wanted to actually kind of challenge even sort of stereotypical thinking about what we think generations are. And so,
Mm.
of course, we know sort of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, all that kind of stuff. And while they, in one side, can be helpful in terms of explaining what might be going on with a particular generation defined by age, we also know it can also not be helpful in terms of putting people into boxes. And
Yes.
so we actually decided to say, well, actually, generation is what we're calling here a generation defined by a time period effect.
Hmm.
And that time
Hmm.
period effect reflects this exact moment right now that we've all been through of navigating this post-pandemic AI future world. And this is
Hmm.
a very unique moment right now. And my colleague Olivia Haywood, who was my co-author on this piece, she had this great line about how we were just trying to figure out how we come out of the pandemic. And then we weren't allowed to talk about the pandemic anymore because all we were only allowed to talk about is AI. And it's like, well, hold on. Have we really figured out hybrid working yet? Have we really figured out how we get back to purpose at work? None of those things. No, because go do the AI thing, people. Go,
Yes.
go
Yes.
figure it out. And
Yes.
so we say Generation Numb because it's all of us in the workforce, all of us
Mhm.
in this moment right now.
So, for decades, about half the presentations I ever go to, they pull out their stats, they pull out stats about turnover, they pull out stats about engagement, and they point to the fact that, I can't remember the exact number, but like 75% of the workforce is either actively disengaged or just or sitting somewhere in the middle kind of passively. Um, how is what you're seeing different?
It's a word I love to loathe, to be honest with you, Andrea,
Great.
because
Tell me why.
because because it tends to absolve us of responsibility. To be very honest with you, of all the different metrics that a business cares about, it almost feels like engagement's one where it's kind of like, oh, good to know. And let's carry on. And you're obviously sharing, what you're seeing in the world. And, part of our research, I think, Gallup was the one that reported that we're in the US, we're in a 10-year low. And that's inclusive of the pandemic, right? Like it's quite nuts to think about it that way. And the reason why I deviate from the term engagement, and I deal with HR leaders all the time about talking about engagement risk and what we need to do, is that it absolves us of the responsibility of what we actually want to do about this. And there's a very easy path to talk about Generation Numb as sort of like there's something culturally happening in the workforce. And then we just drop it on the door of that people or HR leader and say, sounds like a culture problem. Maybe let's make people feel less numb. And our insistence actually in writing the piece is actually to focus on the leader who is driving the change and to actually remind everyone, no matter where you're sitting in the org, you're a change leader. Whether you think you are or not, you're a change leader. And it's not about engagement. It's about getting the job done. And that's something that the business cares about, right? That is something the business prioritizes. And so the framing of Gen Numb for us isn't about, well, you've got an engagement crisis at your work, but rather you need to get people through your 16th major enterprise transformation that you've done in the last 10 years. What's your plan for getting those people through that transformation? And have you realized that there are blockers in terms of performance that you need to release in order to get there? That's why numbness becomes a more powerful concept than engagement, because engagement feels like something that is not urgent. Doesn't feel like it's in the moment. Sure, you can talk about, oh, well, our best people will leave and, good talent will leave. Of course, they will always do. But what we're also finding in our research is that a lot of people want to quit, but because of the economy and the job situation that we're in, they just don't. They can't.
You referred to leaders having to be change agents themselves, that they have to lead the change. Except aren't they also numb? Like we're
I'm
all just
really glad you asked this.
all of us are just like, the pace of change, like it's crazy. Like how are leaders different?
There's, as in, coming off the back of this piece of work, which obviously you tend to get invested into it, and definitely a side project is the leaders edition of Gen Numb, because
Yes.
there's a numbness that comes from being wedged between the immense pressure on what the business expects of you, and then at the snap of a finger, like magic, you're just expected to deliver that in your people, which is a very numb feeling. And we were talking about sort of, experiencing daily loneliness. The word adjacent to loneliness, but not loneliness, is isolation. And today's leader is more isolated than ever. I'm not even talking about a CEO who probably feels incredibly isolated in these moments. I'm just talking even about sort of the top of the house, or, the ones that are responsible for our business units and leading key areas of the business. But how isolating it must be to say, yeah, I'm tired of the change too, to be honest with you. Like I also don't really know how we're going to, navigate our AI strategy, and there's a moment of vulnerability here that I think we can all lean into. And whether it's, us working with some of our key clients, working with very senior stakeholders, or even our own, my own personal leadership journey, and I'm sure your own personal leadership journey, is that it's amazing what happens when you lean into building a community around, I think we're all kind of numb, and what can we do together about it? And there's an element here of not kind of like, putting your shackles up and be like, oh, well, I have to give you all the answers. I need to lead the way. I need to tell you I'm an impenetrable fortress. Like, you don't need to do any of that kind of stuff. Recognize, and this is a huge part of sort of the remedy that we offer, is just read the room and have some really radical listening. Start with that. And this is what I mean, where I'm being very kind of conscious about, like, don't treat that as an HR activity, actually. Like, take control of the work, and of course, partner with the people team, partner with the HR team, get the support that you need. But, there's how I would appreciate it. And I should say this, I have an incredibly generous boss who's very frank and open about the challenges we have as any business. But I would appreciate it to have a boss that says, I don't really know what the next year has in store, but I've got an idea and I'd love your help in how we partner and how we figure it out. And then, this might be a good sort of transition to, what do we even do about numbness? How do we approach it? A key
Yes.
part of it is us wanting to really bring it back to basics, to be honest with you. And
Yes.
this is where we bring out the concept of me, us, and it, and we organize our recommendations according to that. You need to address personal priority. It's hard to talk about vision, mission, and purpose when people are worried about the price of bread. So there's some radical comms there, real listening. Then there's about galvanizing things around us, rebuilding community at work. We need to rediscover that space of community. And there's a role for work in rebuilding that in community. I think the challenge for all of us as leaders, especially HR leaders, is in a hybrid working world or in a return to the office mandate world, what's the role of community in there? And how can we intentionally build places of friction where people can find community and purpose and get galvanized around it?
Do you have any ideas about that? Because, ropes courses and all those like cheesy team building things are not super effective at building community. How do we build
Well,
community?
Well, I think one thing we definitely don't do is try to solve all the problems of the world, because this is certainly a highly complex, nuanced set of challenges. And I think the other piece too that we're finding out in working with our clients is that whatever flavor of numbness you want to call it, and I'm always very sensitive about using such a strong word as numbness with organizations, but however you define it is on one side a very personal experience, but also a very unique experience based on your organizational culture. Shows up in different ways. But I would say the leading point for any of this stuff is actually authenticity. People really just appreciate some honesty right now, some transparency. We talk a lot about don't hide behind your vision and your purpose. Now is not the time to say, oh, we are so excited about our customers when we're going in. We need you to be obsessed over your customers. It's like, speak to the elephant in the room. And
Mhm.
the where I think tactics often fall short, and I often bring up any sort of the office memes of like you don't solve any of these by throwing a pizza party, right? And telling
Right.
people everyone dance now, everyone have fun now, right? It doesn't work
Yeah.
that way, which is why we compartmentalize things in a progression from me to us to it. Because if you are
Mhm.
not ready to get out of the me stage, if you haven't really addressed personal priorities, you can't expect to break through the apathy with people and say, well, I need you to be more creative at work, or let's build more innovation simulations. People are still stuck about their personal priorities. So it is sequential. You need to move from me to us to it. The thing that the scientific remedy of numbness, right? If you think about it that way, is that numbness is about being habituated to a state of stimuli, right? I am in
Mm.
a I am in a stasis of the default mode. And the only way scientifically to break through that is, well, the only way to break through that is by giving me a different set of stimuli. So in this sense,
Mm.
in many ways, the old people enablement playbook needs to be thrown out. And we need to do something that feels bold and brave. The thing that I always say is that you need to remember that people don't want to feel numb. And if you just remember that, anything you're doing in service of that is helping you build momentum. And anything you don't do about that is actively working against you.
So we talked about me, then us and creating community. What about it? What is the it stage?
Yeah. Well, it is actually what embodies that single vision mission slide that often corporate comms tend to gloss over everything. They presume everyone is in it mode, and that is in love with the work and passionate at the work and bought all in. And this is why it is kind of like the holy grail of it. That's where every leader wants to
Right.
get to. That is
Yeah.
where high creativity happens. That's where imagination, innovation happens, all those things. But you need to earn the right to it. And that's the whole idea of me to us to it. And it is
Mhm.
about breaking through the apathy. And the example I just shared with you was a good example of probably a project that resides really nicely in the us piece, but on the cusp of it. because I think by the time people left, they were galvanized around the cause and galvanized around new possibilities. If we're talking about it and breaking through the apathy, it's about understanding new possibilities. And it's I think we take for granted sometimes in the corporate world, just kind of dropping terms like innovation mindset, creativity, as
Yeah.
if these are just kind of turnkey things. It's like, oh, I'm going to turn on my innovation mindset thing. And it's like, these are really difficult things to do. And they're really difficult things to do in this given moment in time.
Hmm.
Like I always like to jest about how it's really hard for me to get obsessed about our customers when I'm worried about what's going on in the world, or I'm worried about why my groceries are gone up 40%, in the last little while, right? There's a dissonance there. There's a
Hmm.
dissonance and it's not our job to fix the problems of the world,
No.
but there's an opportunity for us at work to recognize that I know you want to get there too. That's the other piece too. We've become so consumed in the dialogue today about technology and productivity hacks galore, and use your time here and don't use it there, or you're silly if you're not using this new tech feature, whatever it is, that we've forgotten that humans are actually highly skilled at work and have a ton of talent. and we're actually underutilizing that talent. And so much of what we talk about in the it stage is about building simulations, whether offline or online, and knowing the right modality that works for your people, whether it's to scale or whether it's the right opportunity, but building simulations, for example, that can create areas of practice and play, and just bringing play principles back into work. It's those things that we need to be reminded of. How do we kind of like get crank that engine, that creativity engine, that critical human skill that is needed more than ever in our
Right.
existence, I would
Right.
argue. We
Yes.
need that creativity. And this is where I ground it back in the work, not in engagement. I ground it back in the work because every CEO needs that last tenth of performance from their people, from their top talent, to have that next innovation, to outpace their competition. We're talking about that last little bit of performance, last mile of performance. And you need to build your way in order to do that through the right clarity, through the right agency, through the right community. And then you get to a place where it's like, oh, well, what if we could proactively address our customers' needs rather than constantly reacting to them, which seems to be what we're always doing right now.
Where can people learn more about you, about Sponge, about your white paper?
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about it. It's something that I'm very passionate about because I'm passionate about people at work. And there's a moment we're in right now that I think is worthy of putting the spotlight on. And so I highly recommend, please come find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to creep me, DM me. I'm happy to connect with you and talk with you as much as you want about this. Go to Sponge Learning, go to our website. You can download the white paper. I guarantee you've never seen a white paper like this before. It's bold, it's imaginary. It's got a lot of real talk, to be honest with you, where it's not the angle that I had as a co-author of this piece was I wanted to make sure this was the state of the workforce report people actually preferred to read and
Mm.
wanted to read. And so it will genuinely help you. But at the very least, it'll give you a context that you could bring to your senior leader and say, this might be something we need to take seriously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll put links to all of that in the show notes. All right. I need to close this. Well, thanks, Josh. That was amazing. I'm thinking about, of course, the me, us, and it, where we have to start with people's needs and their own personal worries. And we have to at least try to do something about this us thing, this sense of community, the craving people have for connection before we can move on to the it, to the organization, to the purpose that we're all there for. But if we get that right, I can feel the magic of it already, and I'm excited about that. I talked to someone else who's just a really fascinating guy who's come up with a really innovative way, in my mind it's innovative, for creating connection at work. And a link to my discussion with him is right here. Thanks for watching out there, and see you next time.